Hey guys, today's episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast is presented by our Sports Spectrum quarterly magazine. 4 issues each quarter coming your way right to your inbox. You can subscribe today at sportspectrum.com. You know, our latest issue has Adam Wainwright on the cover, him and his wife Jenny. We do a great story on the Wainwrights, their legacy, playing with the St. Louis Cardinals, where God has taken them, why he hasn't retired yet. And I really thought it was a fascinating article because it focuses on Jenny as well, Mrs. Wainwright, you know, Adam's wife, and the role that she's played in this long and really storied career that Adam Wainwright has had in Major League Baseball. So if you want to read that story, it's a really good one. You can get the latest edition of Sports Spectrum's magazine right now and subscribe today. It's $18 for 1 year. For a full year, it's just $18. But if you want to get a 2-year subscription, it's an even better deal at just $30 for a 2-year subscription to Sports Spectrum's magazine. Check it out today at sportspectrum.com to subscribe. We hope you'll check it out. I really do believe it's the best thing that we do here at Sports Spectrum is our quarterly magazine. Again, check it out at sportspectrum.com.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
And welcome everyone to the show. I am Jason. This is the Sports Spectrum podcast. We are the intersection of sports and faith. My email address, jason@sportspectrum.com. You can email me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. Maybe you have a guest idea. Maybe you have a connection to someone that might make as a good conversation here on Sports Spectrum, or maybe you just want to offer some feedback or some encouragement. You can do that, jason@sportspectrum.com. with my email address and email me directly. I'd love to hear from you. And then check out our website, sportspectrum.com. That's the home base for all of our content, podcast devotionals, articles, testimonials, stories, videos, you name it, all available and all for free at sportspectrum.com. Today on the show, very excited about Vance Pitman, the pastor of Hope Church in Las Vegas, being our guest today. You're going to love Vance. He is a diehard Alabama Crimson Tide and Atlanta Braves fan, and he's a pastor in Las Vegas. He'll tell you how that kind of all worked out, growing up in Alabama and ending up in Las Vegas. But he's also got a really important book out. It's called The Stressless Life. We'd all like a little stress, a little less stress in our lives, right? Well, his book, Experiencing the Unshakable Presence of God's Indescribable Peace, it released back in early February, and we're going to talk about that as well. And I thought it was really, really good what Vance had to say. So you're going to like this guy. He's a new friend of mine, but I love talking to him. I think you'll like him as well. Vance Pitman, the pastor of Hope Church in Las Vegas, joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. Hey, Vance, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, thanks a bunch, man. It's really an honor to be with you today. And thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So glad that you could join us. When your name was brought to my attention, and I thought we've had pastors on this show before, and I do my research and I go to your website or I go to, social media, all I see is like the sports part. I see the pastor part too. It's kind of important, right? And the husband and the dad, but I see a lot of sports on there. And I thought, well, this guy's going to be the perfect guest for Sports Spectrum. It's sports, it's faith. He's a huge sports fan. I mean, you and I are recording this via Zoom and you're rocking your Alabama Crimson Tide sweatshirt. And I'm impressed that you're still rocking it, because that was not a fun way for your season to, that's not how Alabama and their fans expect the season to end at the national championship game, losing to Georgia. How are you doing with that loss? Are you recovered?
Still grieving a little bit, but honestly, this one was easier to take probably than some of the ones in the past when we haven't won.
Yeah.
Because I personally think this was Nick Saban's greatest coaching year.
Why is that?
Well, I think he had one of the youngest teams he's ever had since he's been at Alabama. Last year, 22 starters, 10 went in the NFL draft. All the weapons on the offensive side of the ball. We lost Smith, we lost Ruggs, we lost Najee Harris, and you lose the quarterback. So running back, quarterback, 2 wide receivers. and you replace that team with all these young guys. I mean, our top 2 defensive players were freshmen and sophomores.
Mm-hmm.
All of our wide receivers were new, getting experience. And then throughout the season, we lost into the championship game. We lost both starting wide receivers and 3 of the top 4 cornerbacks to injury. So I didn't even, if you'd asked me in November, is Alabama going to be in the national championship game? I'd have said no, because we just weren't playing at a level that I thought we were ready to be there. So to take that team after losing that many draft picks, after having that many injuries, and the youth of that team, and even get them to being within 2 or 3 plays of a national championship, honestly, to me, was a masterful job of coaching by Nick Saban to keep them even that close.
You are one positive fan, my friend, because if that was me, I would have been like, why did we not win? What's happening? Yeah. And you are looking at the positive of all positives. I love it.
But Kirby Smart, I feel like he's one of our guys. Like Saban, the scene at the end of the game to me was beautiful, where you got Saban and Smart, and Saban smiling like he won the game. I mean, they're literally, he's looking at him like a proud father looks at his son, and they usually don't have the mics on, but somebody had a mic on at the end of the game, and you actually heard Saban and Smart go back and forth a little bit. And it was just gold. I just thought it was, and I'm glad for Kirby. It's been such a mountain for him to get over. He's such a good coach, built such a good program. And I got a bunch of Georgia friends that, it's been, I actually texted several of them and said, hey, I know it's been a long time. If you need any help knowing how to celebrate a championship, I've got some experience. Don't hesitate to reach out.
A humble brag if I ever heard
Absolutely.
one right there.
That's like, an Alabama fan classic right there.
Yes, that is wonderful. Now, I can maybe see why you're being positive with Alabama, because you're also an Atlanta Braves fan, and they just did something they haven't done in 26 years in winning a World Series. So describe like your fandom with the Braves and how happy and excited you must have been when they clinched it and won it all.
So I've lived in Las Vegas for 21 years, but I grew up, born and raised in North Alabama. So I grew up 4 hours from Atlanta, Georgia. In Alabama, we had no pro sports teams other than the University of Alabama football. So we have no pro sports. The closest for me was 4.5 hours to Atlanta, where I grew up, was the Atlanta Braves. And so my summers as a kid growing up were Six Flags and the Atlanta Braves. That was what we did for vacation. And so I've been a Braves fan since the infield was Bob Horner, Chris Chambliss, Rafael Ramirez, Glenn Hubbard. The outfield, the pitchers were Rick Mailer, Rick Camp.
Yes.
It's Murphy. Just a different day. Yeah. Craig McMurtry, Dale Murphy. Terry Harper, so Bruce Benedict. I can go on and on, but so I've been a Braves fan forever. And the 90s was unbelievable, that run we had with Glavine and Smoltz and Avery, and Maddox. But the years since then have not been so great, and it's been a long time. And Atlanta really should have won more than one in the 90s with the rotation they had. Never had the right closer to finish the games. But yeah, my kids celebrated with me. They videotaped me watching on their phones. They recorded me watching the Braves win the World Series, because I was like a kid in the candy store. I mean, it was just, I actually celebrated that more than the recent Alabama ones, because Alabama's been there so much that it's just kind of the expectation now. But this Braves thing, and actually it was a year early. I mean, with Acuna going down, we're losing the entire outfield, Acuna, Ozuna, and Pache going into the World Series. Had to rebuild it at the trade deadline. Just an unbelievable job by GM of the Braves and the organization. But no, I was ecstatic. It was amazing. And the weirdest thing though about me with sports, being in Vegas now, I grew up in Alabama, like I said, and I used to watch ESPN, and I'd see the highlights of hockey, and I'm like, why do they even show hockey on TV? Like, nobody watches this sport. And then we got the Vegas Golden Knights here in Vegas, and oh my gosh! Like, if you were going to give me an opportunity to go to a national championship game and watch Alabama, or the Stanley Cup Finals and watch the Knights, it's not even close. Because football on TV is a better thing to watch. There's so much start, stop, review, replay. Hockey is so fast, and the pace is so intense, and it's nonstop. I describe my Alabama friends this way. I say, when you go to a hockey game in Vegas, it's like the moment Alabama scores a touchdown for 3 straight hours. Like, it just doesn't stop. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I've been to many hockey games in person. I've watched some hockey on TV. It's not my favorite sport, if you will, to watch on TV, kind of like what you just described. But I grew up in the 90s. I mean, I guess I grew up in the 80s, but in the 90s, I started going to minor league hockey games in Albany, New York, where I was living and grew up. And I saw the Albany River Rats, which was the New Jersey Devils affiliate in the AHL. And I was hooked because of the in-person experience that hockey brought versus watching it on television. It's fine watching it on TV, especially the playoffs. They're just the best. But when you go in person and watch a hockey game, regular season, or especially the playoffs, it's a ton of fun. I mean, it's just awesome. Some people have complained and said, well, I can't keep up with the puck. Trust me, you can. And it's wonderful to watch the athleticism of hockey players, right?
It's unbelievable. And you see them on the ice and they look like these big, but they're really not big guys. Like we had several of the guys were in our church the first couple of years of the team here in Vegas. And like if you see football players, basketball players at church, you know those are football and basketball players. But you see hockey players and you don't even, on the ice with all the padding, they look like these monstrous guys, but they're really just average sized guys, but they are unbelievably athletic. I mean, their base, their core, they are just unbelievably athletic guys. It's an incredible sport to watch. And then now, you know, we got the Vegas Raiders here, so Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, it's just like a great time to be in Vegas. And a few weeks ago with the playoff run and getting into the playoffs was really amazing because we have a couple of Raider guys in our church. And then we have a guy that plays on the Steelers that's in our church. I grew up here in Vegas. And I don't know if you remember, but the Steelers were on the brink of not making the playoffs.
I very much remember it.
So it took a guy from our church making a kick to get another guy from our church in Pittsburgh into the playoffs. So the texting going back and forth after that game, and then the Steelers fans were donating to the charities of Daniel Carlson, the kicker here in Vegas, because of his kick. It was a great story.
So funny story around that, Vance. And it's on social media. People can go watch, but I follow a guy named Bart Millard, who is the lead singer of a band called Mercy Me. You probably heard of Mercy Me. And Bart apparently is, and I've had Bart on the show, so I know him pretty decently well, but he's really good friends apparently with Ben Roethlisberger, right? And so this game is going on, you know, at the end of the regular season, the very last regular season game between the Raiders and the Chargers. And he's FaceTiming with Ben Roethlisberger and Toby Mack, by the way, randomly. And they're FaceTiming watching this game. And there's a moment, and he recorded it on his phone. I'm so glad he did, where Ben Roethlisberger leaves the video. He grabs a Raiders helmet. Must have been like a Derek Carr helmet that he got autographed or something. Puts it on. And he's watching on FaceTime with Bart Millard and Toby Mack, clearly rooting for the Raiders to win so that they can get in the playoffs. And he's wearing a Raiders helmet. And it's funny because the caption was something like, "You will never, ever see this again." Ben Roethlisberger wearing a helmet of a team other than Pittsburgh.
No.
It was quite the finish and you know, as we record this, we don't know if the Raiders are going to go on and win the Super Bowl or if they're not even going to get out of the playoffs. But what a game and what a moment for Las Vegas. Just thinking for you, 20 years you've been in Vegas, and I want to hear your story in a second. But 5 years ago, there was no Vegas, you know, Golden Knights and Vegas Raiders. There was just UNLV and a bunch of people coming in town to gamble and have fun. And now you have two professional sport teams. It's a pretty cool time to be in Las Vegas, I would imagine.
It's an unbelievable time. Like, to be honest, the hottest ticket in Vegas is the Vegas Golden Knights. Like, for 5 years, that thing's been sold out every night. It's hottest ticket in town. I've traveled now some and seen some hockey around the country. And the only place I've paid more money than Vegas to go to a game is in New York at the Rangers, you know, because their ticket prices are pretty high. But there's several places where you can actually buy a plane ticket, fly there, go to the hockey game, and it's cheaper to do that than to go to the hockey game in Vegas. Yeah. So that's been unbelievable. And the way the city rallied around that team after the October 1 tragedy, just really, I watched Las Vegas become a community and not just this transient city after that tragedy. And the Vegas Golden Knights were a huge part of that. And now with the Raiders being here and the way the city has embraced them, it's just been, it's a great time, especially for a sports guy like me. It's a great time.
Well, you have the draft coming there, the NFL draft, the Super Bowl is coming there. If we get to cover the Super Bowl again, I'm going to call Vance Pitman to come and co-host some shows with me from the Super Bowl if it's out in Las Vegas. So it's a great time to be out there for sure. How does one end up in Vegas growing up in Alabama, Vance? How does that happen?
Well, not easily, because where I grew up, people don't go to Las Vegas. And if they do, they don't tell anybody. Long story short, I came to know Christ personally as a freshman in college. It's interesting. I was actually getting my degree in radio, television, and film in college because I wanted to do sports radio of all things.
There you go. Yeah, me too. When I was a kid, that was my dream.
Me too. I loved it and still love it. It's what I listen to every day in the car. I've got the ESPN radio on the on my Sirius XM. But so I'm in college, come to Christ, and about a year after coming to Christ, just walking with Jesus, God began to stir my heart for ministry, and so I shifted my degree to history. Graduated with a history degree, went to seminary, began pastored for 10 years around the Bible Belt, started in student ministry, and then began senior pastoring churches. And in 1999, I had just come through a situation pastoring my first church that didn't really end super well. Long story short, God put me in a place, a small town that the church grew rapidly, and a lot of people came to Christ. What I didn't realize, I was so young in ministry, was that when a church grew, not everybody was always excited about that. There were people in the church that didn't go well, power struggle. They asked me to leave. And I was ready to quit ministry. I was done. I was throwing in the towel. Thought I can serve the kingdom and not work for a church. Right. But God didn't let me do that. In that moment, he really taught me that he'd not called, the primary call of my life wasn't ministry, that the primary call of my life was intimacy. And ministry is what he did out of the overflow of intimacy. And up until that moment, I really thought it was all about what I was supposed to do for him. And it was really about being with him and allowing him to do something in and through my life. And that really changed my life. So I began to pursue Christ's life in the Gospels, just really looking for things in Jesus that weren't in me so that he could conform me to his image and work through me. And I'm reading in the Gospels one morning in Luke 4, and I read this verse. Jesus said, I must preach the kingdom to the other cities also, for I was sent for this purpose. And that morning I went and got my wife, and I said, I don't know what this means, but the Holy Spirit of God just convicted me that he wants us to go somewhere to join in his activity in a city and give our lives to this city about multiplying the church, expanding the kingdom. And we didn't know where, we didn't know when. 2 weeks later, a mentor from Atlanta, Georgia, pastor friend named Johnny Hunt. Johnny reached out to me and said, Vance, our church has been asked by the North American Mission Board to plant a church in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he said, God's put it on my heart, you're to be the pastor of that church. So 2 weeks earlier, we said, Lord, yes. We don't know where, we don't know when. 2 weeks later, God had the audacity to fill in the blank with Las Vegas. And we did something that I don't recommend church planters to do. I've worked and trained a lot of planters over the last 21 years. But we resigned our church there in Memphis, Tennessee, where I was living at the time, and began the process of moving to Las Vegas to plant a church. And we'd never even visited the city. But we just so knew that God had called us that if we did anything but go, we'd be living in disobedience to him. So that's the long story short of how we wound up in Las Vegas. It started devotionally in an intimate call from the Lord, and then the opportunities came in place and God just confirmed it. And we moved here, got here 2 days before Christmas 2000.
Wow. And then everything just kind of grows from that. I mean, it's one of the largest churches around. And when you think about where God has brought your church today, I'm guessing your plan wasn't to plant a church so it would grow, and become a mega church or the size of whatever it is, right? That's not the plan. The plan is just to be faithful and preach the gospel, I would imagine. And, whoever comes and hears it. But God did some pretty cool things. What was that like to watch it kind of progress and grow in the way that it has to the point where it is now?
Yeah, planting a church in a lot of ways is like, you and I talked before we started recording about our kids. It's like having a child, and then you watch this child grow up and then exceed all the expectations you could have ever had for, your kid. And God brought us here. We knew to penetrate the lostness of this city. Las Vegas, when I moved here 21 years ago, 95% of Las Vegas was non-Christian, 60% was non-religious. So When I moved here, there was about 1.2 million. Now there's almost 2.3 million that live in the city of Las Vegas. So 1 million people plus have moved here in these 21 years since I've been here. And 95% of them, when I first came here, didn't have a relationship with Christ. And so we knew we'd come here to penetrate the lostness of the city. We did never think about being a large church. We did think about multiplying the church. Our strategy was to penetrate lostness through multiple. We just knew the fastest way to reach a city was multiply churches. One church can't reach a city by itself. So we've now started the joy for me is we've now, in the last 21 years, we've planted 76 churches out of our fellowship. Been a part of planting 76 churches out of our fellowship in partnership with others. About 20 of those in Las Vegas, the rest up and down the West Coast, because we have a passion to penetrate lostness in the West. 40% of the unchurched population in America lives in the Western United States. And the United States of America is now the fourth largest numerical mission field on planet Earth. Only China, India, and Indonesia have more people within their borders that don't know Jesus than the United States. So we're the fourth largest lost nation in the world. 40% of that lives in the Western United States. And the Western United States is the only pre-Christian culture left in America. Everywhere else in America has become post-Christian. Christianity's been there. It's exploded. They've had great awakenings, but now it's moved on. You see it there in the New England states. Yes. Churches that used to be thriving epicenters of the gospel are now libraries, museums, restaurants, and it's happening in the Bible Belt now. The Western United States has never seen those great movements of God. And that's significant because if you study movement globally, movement typically only happens in pre-Christian context. So I believe if there is hope for another great awakening in America, it is the Western United States. So we've been trying to plant churches out here and have a dream to plant 300 churches that would reproduce and multiply 10 times each. If that happens, that's 3,000 new churches. If each of them reach 250 people for Christ, that's 750,000 people. Now that's significant because that's 1% of the 75 million people that live in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. So we've asked God to give us 1% as the seed of a movement that could really touch America and the nations for the glory of God.
Man, what a cool opportunity. What an amazing opportunity, right?
It's been unbelievable. God's got a sense of humor. Bring a kid from Alabama, small town Alabama, to a place like Vegas. Like when we first started our church, people would bring people to hear me talk because they were like, you just got to hear his accent. Like they just didn't know where I was from. It's like I was from another planet. Yeah. And the cool part, God connected me with a guy out here in our third or fourth year, a black guy from inner city Camden, New Jersey. So Camden, New Jersey, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, like two totally different planets.
I'd say so.
And God births his church. Our church now in Las Vegas has 54 languages spoken in our fellowship. It's one of the most multi-ethnic, multicultural fellowships I've ever seen anywhere in the world. So God's got a real sense of humor, but it's been a great testimony to the grace of God and his gospel that can truly change lives, to see thousands of people in our city come to know Jesus as Lord and Savior.
Vance Pitman is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. He's the pastor of Hope Church in Las Vegas. And, you know, you've seen the past few years, having pastored a very large church and all the church planning that's been done, what the past few years has done to so many when we're thinking about this. And now you're releasing this very timely book. It released February 1st, called The Stressless Life. And as people hear that, they probably are laughing at the title, thinking, come on, Vance, there's no such thing as a stressless life. Stress is just a part of life. Tell us about this book and maybe why you decided to write on this topic.
Yeah. And boy, you mentioned the timing of it. And it's interesting. My first book released a week before, 2 weeks before the COVID outbreak started. So you're talking about the worst time to ever release a book. So maybe, hopefully, prayerfully, this time I got my timing right.
Right.
Because you're right. The last 2 years have just been, I've been in ministry 31 years. Not even close. The last 2 years have been the most challenging, most difficult time for anybody in spiritual leadership, but really in leadership in general.
Yes.
But the book really for me was born out of a journey that happened for me in 2013. We moved here to Vegas in 2000 to plant the church. For 13 years, saw a lot of growth, rapid growth, a lot of multiplication of the church. And to be honest, as things begin to grow, I'm a very type A, very driven leader. Grew up in a Bible Belt where I kind of had this thing that a lot of pastors, and that's overgeneralization, but many pastors just didn't have the work ethic that I thought maybe they should have had.
Sure.
And even in communities, oftentimes, pastors were called lazy or whatever. And I just had this chip on my shoulder that I was going to change that for the world. Got out here, and Vegas, planting a church out here it's hard. You plant churches in non-Bible Belt contexts, everything's challenging. Even when you try to buy land, build buildings, banks in Alabama look at churches as stable, secure investments. Out here, not at all. It'd be like a mosque trying to go to a bank in Alabama and build in a small town. They just looked at us like we were. So everything was challenging. And by 2013, I literally hit a wall. I remember going home one evening in 2013 to have dinner with my family and just not being able to really process what was happening at the table. Went upstairs, went to bed, and I slept for 8 straight days. All the stress and the tension of 13 years of being in a rapid growing organization in a very difficult context where we'd seen moral failures. We'd seen, we finally got a building in 2012. Took us $13 million to get it built, just a small campus, but in Vegas, everything's expensive.
Yeah.
And we'd been in the building 3 months, and we had the 100-year flood in Las Vegas. Our entire campus was underwater, flooded 3 months, and nobody in the desert's got flood insurance. So we just had wave after wave, the economic collapse of 08 and 09 that devastated Las Vegas, wave after wave of challenge. 2013, I hit a wall, and I went through the physical version of a nervous breakdown. My body literally shut down from the stress. Slept 8 straight days, lost about 16, 18 pounds, wouldn't eat, couldn't wake up. And ultimately, what had to happen out of that is some people had to come into my life and help me do a hard reset. You take your phone, it gets messed up, and you just do a hard reset to reboot and start over. I had to do that with my life. I just had to reboot, hard reset, start over. Other than preaching, they cut out all travel, all counseling, all appointments, all leadership meetings for 9 months to let me just do a hard reset and start over. And what I discovered in that journey is, man, there's another way. We don't have to just endure life. We can literally enjoy life. What Jesus has promised us is something very different. And you mentioned, somebody saying stressless. Really? Can you have that? Well, to be honest, to not have that is to not follow the command of God himself. One of the key verses for the book is out of Philippians 4, where Paul's writing and he says, do not be anxious about anything. Now, and here's the key. In the Greek text, that's an imperative, which means it's not a suggestion. It's not a platitude. It's a command, meaning to be anxious, to have stress, is to live in sin against God. If that's my response to the situation and circumstances in my life, I'm settling for something far less than what Jesus has actually promised me in the Christian life.
Yeah, that's really a great reminder, I think, for all of us, especially those listening who are followers of Christ and believers, to remember, that anxiousness, that stress, it just is not from God. It doesn't come from him. It's funny because I lead a Bible study at my church. We call it a life group at my church. And I lead one of those at my house. And we were on a Zoom call because of, not meeting in person all the time with COVID and all that. But I was on the Bible study and I led, and I asked them a simple question. If Jesus was standing in front of you and he asked you, what do you want? What would be your answer? So there's Christ in front of you and you're talking to him and he just looks at you and says, Jason, what do you want? And so I asked that to, 7 or 8 people in our small group, and Vance, the majority of them just said peace.
Yeah.
And it made me think of your book as we were preparing for this conversation and thinking, my goodness, there's so many living without peace.
Yeah. Well, and you just nailed it. It is the thing that everyone is hungering for. Yeah. And the beauty of this is it's exactly what Jesus promised us. And you mentioned a minute ago, people would mock a title like this. I actually had to fight with my publisher and my agent a little bit in walking out this title, because they were like, no, you need to say stress less as 2 words, not stressless, but stress less. And the problem is we've actually, as Christians, even accepted the reality that what Jesus actually promised us, we can't really attain in this life. That's coming in heaven, but not now. And that's not true. We can actually have a stressless life. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't stressful situations. There's a difference between stress and stressors. Stressors are the tension, the toil, the things in life, the circumstances beyond our control. Stress is how we respond to that. Stress is when you and I have fearful concern. The way I define stress in the book is fearful concern when life's demands seem greater than my ability to meet them. And so stress is my response to the circumstances in life. And the reality is what Jesus has offered us is instead of responding in stress, you and I can experience the unshakable presence of God's indescribable peace. And that's really what the world needs to see. One of the great tragedies to me of 2020 and 2021 is the whole world went through a chaotic situation. And believers had a moment to shine. We had a moment to show the world, hey, the difference Jesus makes in our lives, it's not that we're immune from tragedy or difficulty or political uncertainty. We got to walk through all that too. The difference is we have peace in the midst of the circumstances. And what's tragic is believers abandon that. And we reacted just like the rest of the world. And it misrepresented the character of God to the watching world around us in a very damaging way.
Yeah, in a time when people were looking for that. I thought 2020, I remember talking to a lot of people because we were all home. So this podcast, I mean, I was recording interviews, I felt like every day, every hour, because we're all home. And I remember thinking, I want this to be a moment where, because people were worried and uncertainty and, life expectancy and deaths obviously taking place. And it was a time when people, I think, were doing some soul searching and wondering what else is there, and, more open to, hear about God and hear about the Bible. And yeah, we kind of messed it up in a lot of ways too, unfortunately. I think social media had a big play in that, don't you think?
I think social media did. And I also think one of the great enemies of our day, there is a syncretism that's taking place in America between our faith and our politics on both sides of the aisle.
Man, ain't that the truth? Yeah.
Well, and the reality is, bro, God has called us to be about a kingdom. And it's a kingdom that's not of this world.
Right.
And it's not unique to us. I mean, think about when Jesus first gave the commission to the disciples in Acts 1. He's about to give them the commission to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And what is their question? Lord, is now the time that the kingdom is restored to Israel? They wanted to talk politics. They wanted Israel to be back on top over Rome. And Jesus said, that's not our business. Like, it's not for you to know times or epochs. He said, you're to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Yeah. And what we've done in America is we've substituted our political worldview and what we believe about American ideology. And listen, I'm an American. Like, my grandfather fought in 2 wars. I cry when they sing the national anthem at every hockey game I go to.
Yeah.
But man, we've settled for something far less. We've been invited into the kingdom of God, which is so much bigger and vaster. And because of that, our reaction to the pandemic, the political uncertainty and unrest, all of that stuff as Christians, rather than walking out the peace of God that passes all comprehension, which means, like, you can't even really explain it. I shouldn't have this peace. I just do, because it's a gift from God that's born out of intimate fellowship with Him.
The book, again, is called The Stressless Life, Experiencing the Unshakable Presence of God's Indescribable Peace. It released February 1st, 2022. All right. This has been a great conversation, Vance. Let me circle it back to sports as we wind down here. And my last question to you, if you could attend one sporting event from the past, or maybe something that you haven't attended yet that you would hope would happen in the future, what would it be?
Well, it would have been easy for me had I not just gone to Game 5 of the Atlanta Braves World Series, because that was my bucket list, literally, to be at a game in the World Series. And that game was so incredible because Game 5, we thought we clinched it. Adam Duvall hits a grand slam in the first inning. The place goes nuts.
I know.
Jeff Francoeur, I heard him say in an interview, in all these years playing in Atlanta, it was the loudest he'd ever heard Atlanta Stadium was when that grand slam went out of the ballpark.
Yes.
The problem is, I think we all thought we won in the first inning, and then we didn't play the rest of the game. Yep. But that would have been my bucket list. But I would probably say, if I was going to go back, it would be one of the national championship games when Bear Bryant was coaching Alabama. That was just such an era of classic football, probably one of those Alabama Penn State type games when in 78, 79, the goal line stand, one of those type games. Or if I'm going to think future, the Golden Knights winning the Stanley Cup. I went, the Golden Knights' first season in Vegas, we make it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Washington Capitals. I got a buddy in Toronto, a pastor friend, who called me and said, Vance, I know you're new to hockey, but you spend whatever you have to spend to get to one of the Stanley Cup Finals games, because he said, I'm a Toronto fan. We haven't been in 50 years. He said, this may be the last opportunity. So I spent everything. I sold a kidney to get my family to the Stanley Cup Finals and watch the Capitals win it on our ice. It was awful. But so that would be what I would say.
That's good. No, it's tough when you're going to an event like that, like a playoff game or a world championship game, and your team loses. And you saw the Braves lose Game 5. You saw the Vegas Knights lose in the Stanley Cup. Those are tough. I mean, you don't take away from the experience, but that's a good bucket list. Let's go see him win one, right?
Yes, I would love it. When you come to Vegas, we got to go to a hockey game. I'll take you to the Vegas Golden Knights.
I'm taking you up on that, Vance. Listen, congratulations on the new book, The Stressless Life. And thanks for being here. And you're welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
And many thanks to Vance Pitman, the pastor at Hope Church in Las Vegas, and the author of the new book, The Stressless Life. Love talking to Vance, and grateful that he joined us here today on Sports Spectrum. I mean, between Alabama, the Atlanta Braves, the Vegas Golden Knights, I mean, now the Vegas Raiders, right? The Las Vegas Raiders. And then, of course, his new book. We had a lot to talk about there, and he's awesome. I really enjoyed chatting with him, and I hope people go get his new book. That's such an important book and a timely book for where we are as a society and as believers in Jesus. Having less stress in our life would be good. How about no stress in our life? That would be amazing. But I thought Vance was a lot of fun, and we could have gone longer. In fact, we talked for another 10 or 15 minutes after we hit stop on the recording, just because we were hitting it off. And I'm grateful that he joined us, and what a great guy. And I'm going to take him up on his offer when and if I ever get to Las Vegas, which I've never been, but when I get there, I'm going to hang out with him. And he said he'd take me to a Vegas Golden Knights game. So I'm all in on going to see some NHL hockey with Vance Pitman. We appreciate him joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. And we do appreciate you as well. We really do. I say that every episode, but my goodness, if we did a show and nobody listened, what's the point, I guess? I mean, we're passionate about what we do, but we're passionate that this is reaching people. And we're so grateful over 5 years now that you have tuned in. More than 3 million downloads of this podcast, and the audience is getting bigger and bigger by the month. And we're just grateful to you that you see value in what we're doing, and really that you kind of align with where we are, right? Bringing Jesus into the sports conversation. I think sports is such an important place where so many lessons can be learned. And when you bring Christ into it, it's even better. And using sports as a vehicle, as a gateway to point to Jesus that's what we're all about. And hopefully you're all about that as well. So thanks for tuning in. Click that subscribe and that follow button on the app that you're listening on so that you never miss an episode. And then make sure you share this episode with someone. Maybe you know someone who's struggling, who needs that, less stress, if you will, in their lives, or is just a big Alabama or Braves fan. Certainly share this podcast with them, and then tune in next time for another episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. We love you guys. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you then.